2, 1. Order, order. Welcome to the Liaison Committee. That's the chairs of select committees in Parliament on Monday the 23rd of March 2026, and we're delighted to have the Prime Minister in front of us today on one of his regular visits to this committee to discuss the issues of the day. I should say, Prime Minister, we did tell you in advance, of course, that we wanted to discuss the international situation, and I wanted to place on record that Dame Emily Thornberry, who chairs, of course, the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, is unable to be with us today because she's travelling with the Foreign Affairs Committee on a long-planned visit to Greenland, and I know she would have welcomed the opportunity to ask you questions today, but she's nevertheless been able to talk to us about the situation. So she's made some input, even though she's not physically present.
Okay.
And in Prime Minister, of course, every time you come in front of us, seems to me that there's another tragedy. And in the early hours of this morning, the Jewish ambulance service Hatzola was attacked in Golders Green. In my own borough of Hackney, we know and value the work Hatzola carries out to support the people of Hackney, Homerton Hospital and the NHS, and the loss of 4 ambulances and happily no individuals hurt is a big issue. I know that Sarah Sackman, the MP for Golders Green, is keen to see an uplift in neighbourhoods of policing in neighbourhoods with large Jewish populations, and I'm sure you would want to say something about that and what the latest update to the public about that investigation.
Yes, if I may, Chair, I'd really welcome that. Can I start by expressing my disgust at this horrific anti-Semitic attack in Golders Green in the early hours of this morning. The idea that ambulances could be considered a target is simply horrendous, and I know the impact that that will have had on so many individuals, not just those in the area, and I've been with Sarah Sackman this morning, the constituency MP, but also the neighbouring MPs, but also, frankly, the whole Jewish community across the country, not least because this is not an isolated incident, and the rise of anti-Semitic hatred is there for all to see. In relation to the ambulances, I spoke to the Health Secretary this morning, and I can confirm that we will replace the ambulances that were destroyed in the horrendous attack. London Ambulance will have the replacements ready by tomorrow morning at the latest, so I'm really pleased to be able to put that support immediately into place. And also to say that the NHS will pay for the permanent replacements that are going to be needed in due course. That is the right thing to do, but it also underscores what I think is a really important principle, that this is not just an attack on the Jewish community, but it's an attack on all of us, on everyone who holds the fundamental British values of tolerance and respect. Chair, I also met Jewish community leaders at Downing Street this morning, along with some members of the Cabinet and local MPs to the area of the attack, to discuss the actions that we were taking to keep the community safe. Can I thank them for attending at such very short notice? There are a number of actions coming out of that meeting, including speeding up aspects of the social cohesion strategy that's been published, the support that's available for the CST and other measures. But the idea that we live in a society where people should feel they need to hide their identity or their religion is frankly abhorrent. Anti-Semitism is an old hatred, but it requires constant vigilance to overcome it. And so let me be clear, we won't rest in our fight to defeat this poison and keep the Jewish community safe. Chair, I've got wider updates on the position in Iran and the Middle East, but I think I'm in your hands. I could do it now, it takes some time, or I can try to weave it into questions which I expect.
Well, I think we'll come to some of that in questions, and we'll make sure that you've got time at the end, Prime Minister, to update the country on anything that we haven't covered in that time. But can I thank you on behalf of the committee for that statement, and I think there's great relief that the swift action to replace the ambulances is good. Will you be looking at increasing policing in areas with large Jewish populations, as Sarah Sackman has requested?
We've discussed that this morning, and I've already actioned some discussions with the Home Office about that. I won't go into the specific details here, but just to rest assured, that is one of the issues.
I appreciate it's not 24 hours yet. So
no, we did discuss it this morning. Sarah Sackman raised it, and we're already taking action.
Thank you. And speaking from a borough which has also got a large Jewish community, I think that will be much.
I should emphasise that, of course, this is in that constituency, but right across the country, there will be concern, and that's reflected in the discussions we had this morning.
Thank you for that, Prime Minister. And as you say, there's big things happening in the world, and the Iran war and its economic impacts are obviously of crucial importance. So I'm going to ask Liam Byrne MP to kick off.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for that statement, Prime Minister. I know you're chairing COBRA on the war in Iran later this afternoon. Things are moving very quickly and the fog of war remains thick. But what is your central planning scenario for how this conflict ends, and what's your view about the timeframes?
Well, my very strong view is we need to de-escalate and bring an end to this conflict as swiftly as possible. And we've been working with a number of countries in that regard. And to that end, I welcome the talks reported between the US and Iran. And to be clear with the committee, we, the UK, were aware that was happening. And the immediate priority has to be a swift resolution of the conflict and delivering a negotiated agreement which puts tough conditions on Iran, particularly in relation to nuclear weapons. So that's the sort of number one priority. Obviously, there's no certainty in this, and that's why, in addition to the usual issues at COBRA meetings, which are often military, diplomatic, consular, we're holding a COBRA this afternoon on the economic impact, because my strong sense is that most people are very anxious and concerned at what they see on their television screens in terms of the conflict and the fear of escalation. But they're also very concerned about the impact it might have on them and their families, and that's what we will be absolutely focusing on this afternoon.
President Trump is obviously talking about days and weeks for this conflict to end. The markets are obviously pricing now for a disruption that lasts for some months. I know you've got to be very careful about not triggering panic buying of anything, but I mean, do you think that households and businesses in our country should be planning for a disruption that actually lasts for months, or do you think that actually this can be concluded in days and weeks, as President Trump seems to suggest?
Hard to answer that question, if I'm honest about it. I think all of our focus and energy has to be in the swift de-escalation, but we've got to plan on the basis that it could go on for some time, and that's the way in which we'll plan this afternoon. And since the conflict started, I've been really clear with the team that we mustn't fall in to the sort of false comfort of thinking that there will necessarily be a quick and early end to this. We have to plan on the basis there may not be. In terms of energy has been where a huge amount of focus has been. On energy supplies, I can reassure the committee that we haven't any meaningful concerns about energy supplies. Obviously, the price fluctuates daily. For household energy bills, it is important for me to reiterate that they will be cut because of the measures we took in the budget last year and then held until the end of June. And I know that for many members of the public, the question they've been asking is, does that still hold even if the conflict goes on? And the answer to that question is yes. So there's comfort there for households. Obviously, fuel duty is held until September. We've been working intensively in the last week or two with fuel suppliers, particularly petrol retailers, to make sure that nobody is profiteering from this, and that's why we've said to the CMA they've got to be all over any price gouging, any attempts to make money. And we've taken measures in relation to households that use oil for their heating, which is predominantly rural communities and quite extensively in places like Northern Ireland, where 68% heat their households by oil. They're the immediate measures. This afternoon we will be looking at a wider set of measures for the economy and specific sectors within the economy, and the Chancellor will then make a statement to the House tomorrow. So we'll have COBRA later on, which I will chair, and then the Chancellor will come to Parliament tomorrow to announce the outcome of the COBRA meeting so that there can then be questions in Parliament in relation to that.
Thank you. Bill Esserton MP.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for that explanation, Prime Minister. LNG production in the region has been severely damaged already. Reports are that it will take 5 years to restore that level of production. This is going to have a profound effect on supply and on prices beyond the end of June, unfortunately. How are you factoring in those calculations to what support will be needed both by consumers and by industry?
Well, we're looking at what support can be put in. Obviously, that's subject to further discussion, not least at the Cobra this afternoon. It's a little bit early to be too concrete, if I'm honest, because we don't know yet how much longer this is going to go on. We know with households what's been held. We know that with energy-intensive businesses, there's already some support in, but I think a lot of businesses would be saying, well, even if we don't fall within the energy-intensive bracket, is there anything that can be done for us? I haven't got a concrete answer that I can put before you today, but I can assure you that we're looking across the board at what can be done, whether it's cost of living or the support we need to put in. I want to make sure we've examined all the appropriate levers that we can pull.
Thank you, and we'll come to more of that in a moment, but I do want to, I think with everything going on in the world, it's important we discuss defence, and Tan Singh Desi MP is going to...
Thank you very much, Chair. Prime Minister, we were seeing reports of the US significantly ramping up its military presence around Iran in preparation for an attack, just as they did with Venezuela. But when they started the war, it was embarrassing that we couldn't even muster one single naval asset around the region. Are you embarrassed?
But no, I don't think that's actually right. During January and February, we obviously could see the build-up. We are working very closely with the US on intelligence, and therefore we pre-deployed quite a lot of assets to the region. Just to reassure you, radar systems were pre-deployed, counter-drone systems were redeployed, F-35 jets were deployed in greater number than were already there, ground-based air defence was deployed, 400 extra UK personnel were deployed, and autonomous mine hunting systems were deployed. Yeah. So far as HMS Dragon is concerned, it normally takes 6 weeks for the loading onto and deployment of the relevant capability onto the Dragon. That was done within 6 days with 22-hour working days, both with our service personnel and civilian personnel working together. But there was a lot of pre-deployment.
I'm aware of that, but with all due respect, that's one naval asset. I think if we look at the wider scene, more than £500 million worth of submarine maintenance has had to be postponed because of the lack of a dry dock facility. Doesn't that failure to quickly deploy a Royal Navy asset simply demonstrate yet again how under-resourced and overstretched our armed forces are?
Well, the spending under the last government wasn't adequate, and Ben Wallace, the former Defence Secretary, concluded that the armed forces were hollowed out. But firstly, let me pay tribute to the work that they do, and let me assure the committee they have been working from about an hour or two after this conflict started with pilots in the air across the region, and they've been working continually, hundreds of hours since then. So I don't want anything I say to detract from the work, courageous work that they've been doing.
And let me talk about the IAMD, so the Integrated Air and Missile Defence Systems, or the lack thereof. We saw Iran launch a plethora of missiles and drones, including thousands of miles away towards the UK-US military base in Diego Garcia. If Iran or another adversary, such as Russia, were to launch ballistic missiles towards the UK, how would we defend ourselves?
Well, as you will appreciate, we keep this under constant review, and I can assure the committee of the assessments that we carry out on a constant basis. The 2 missiles didn't reach Diego Garcia, but we're continually monitoring this. On the question of integrated air defence systems, this is hugely important. And just in relation to our Gulf partners, to update the committee, we've embedded the UK airspace battle management specialists into military commands in the region, We're working with industry to distribute air defence missiles to Gulf partners. We're deploying short-range air defence systems to Bahrain at speed. This was an issue that came up as a matter of some urgency over the course of this weekend. And we're doing the same with Kuwait and Saudi Arabia.
It's good what we're doing with allies, but I think the British public will rightly be concerned about our own safety, because forget a golden dome or a platinum dome or any other dome, we have not made any such investments in our own defence. And would you not agree that the public will be concerned about the ability of Russia or another adversary to launch ballistic missiles, and we have no way of defending ourselves?
Yeah, look, we constantly assess this, and we do have very effective ways of defending ourselves, and I don't want to raise levels of public anxiety. They're anxious about what they're already seeing on their television screens. They're anxious about the impact it will have on them, particularly economically, in their households. And I don't want to raise their levels of anxiety. I can tell you our military personnel, our security and intelligence services are working literally 24/7 to keep us safe and doing a very good job
we all
in
pay
that
tribute
regard.
to their bravery. Prime Minister, when finally is the fabled defence investment plan going to be published? Have you got a date for us?
Well, we're working hard to finalise it. I know from the work your committee does, you'll be aware this has been the first zero-based review that has ever been undertaken, so it's a huge amount of work. We're finalising it. We've absolutely got to get it right, and I want to ensure that anything relevant from this conflict is included within it, but we're finalising it. I can't give you a date, but I can tell you we're finalising it.
Let me finally go on to defence spending then, if I may. I was at the Munich Security Conference last month when you intimated that you recognise the level of threats that we face and the urgency to build up our hard power, because that is, as in your words, the currency of the day. But there's a huge difference between rhetoric and reality. So will you chart out a path to reaching 3% of GDP spend on defence in this Parliament in order that we can get to the 3.5% agreed NATO target by the end of next Parliament, as in by 2035? Is that something that you can commit
Yes,
to?
so obviously we've already committed to 2.5% in 2027, and we'll hit that. That means that in this Parliament we'll spend £270 billion more than we would otherwise have done on defence. We have made that commitment to 3% in the next Parliament and to 5% by 2035, which is made up in the way that was agreed at the NATO summit.
That means
what I said at the Munich conference is that clearly we're going to have to go further and faster, and obviously I'll set out what I mean by that in due course.
One of the things you can do, Prime Minister, is to give indication of future orders, even if they're not that funded at this point. Is that something that you're considering?
Yeah, can I just address that both in relation to the DIP process and any defence spending?
DIP, Defence Investment Plan.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Nothing we're doing now in considering the DIP is interfering with ongoing orders, and you'll have seen the Leonardo order go through 2 or 3 weekends ago, which was a very important order.
Patricia Ferguson, partly on this issue.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Prime Minister. Last week we heard reports that Type 83 frigate programme could be delayed to plug gaps in the defence budget. Do you recognise that such delays could hamper momentum which has been building in the shipbuilding industry in recent years? Yeah,
I don't want delays, and that's why I'm insisting that there shouldn't be any delays in the order. It's really important that those orders continue in the way that is expected. Shipbuilding is obviously hugely important in Scotland. I was very pleased that we got the Norway frigate deal just a few months ago, which will provide at least a decade's worth of work in Scotland. It also ensures that there's interoperability between our frigates and Norway frigates, which is increasingly an important part of the strategic work that we're doing. But I went to Clydesdale, as you know, to see the workforce there, to thank them, and also to allow them to see that for them and the next generation there's more work in the shipyards for them.
Moving away from BAE, which is partly in my constituency, and looking at Babcock's at Rosyth, they're on track to win a £1 billion contract from the Danish Navy for Type 31 frigates. Can you tell us how close you think we might be to securing that deal? And at a time when the Royal Navy is very stretched, how do we ensure that we get the right balance between exporting frigates and retaining them for domestic use?
Yes, for Babcock, firstly, we've obviously already done a deal with Indonesia, which is important for Babcock's Rosyth shipyard. On the Danish deal, if you'll forgive me, I won't go into huge detail other than to say we're working very hard on it at all levels, including at leader level. I very much hope that we can make progress. It will be on the same strategic basis as Norway and actually Typhoons that we did a deal with Turkey on, which is this question not just of the orders, but how we integrate and work strategically with our NATO partners. But I'm very happy to update you privately with further information about the Danish proposal.
And how do we ensure that balance between exporting frigates and retaining enough for our own use going forward?
We need both, and we need to get that right. But I can't stress enough the interoperability. The fact that Norway and us will have the same capability, which means that our service personnel can work on their frigates, their service personnel can work on our frigates, is a really big step forward. We've all said Europe needs to step up and do more. I absolutely subscribe to that. I've argued with my at leader level with Europeans that what that means is not just more defence spend, but more cooperation and capability and coordination. And what I mean by that is having capability. If we've learnt one thing from Ukraine, it's that by having different capabilities over the years, when we've then tried to work that together for the benefit of Ukraine, it's been more difficult than it otherwise, in my view, should have been. So I'm trying to fix that at the same time.
Thank you. And the Scottish Affairs Committee visited Fastlane in autumn 2024, and while we were there we saw for ourselves the scale of investment needed to maintain that base's operational readiness. What investment is being made to ensure that Fastlane and Lossiemouth bases can continue to maintain NATO's defence posture in the High North?
Well, this is kept under constant review because it's of the first priority, and it is my job to ensure that we have the resource necessary in relation to what is the most important deterrent that we have. And as you know, I've been up there myself for a number of purposes, but not least to welcome back the incoming crew of a submarine. And I have to say it was a very humbling experience. They'd been at sea for a very, very long time, not knowing where they were, but working 6-hour shifts from the moment they left to the moment they came back. I also spent some time with their families who were to receive them back early the next morning and to say thank you to the families who, of course, had spent all that time without their loved ones.
Thank you very much. And personnel is a really key issue too. What work are you doing with the Ministry of Defence to ensure that we are recruiting at the right rate that we need? Because there's been a long-standing issue with lack of personnel.
Yes, and thank you for raising that. We are turning around the recruitment, and we're now recruiting at a higher rate than was previously the case, holding on to people and retaining people for longer. I have no doubt that the fact that we put in place a pay increase that properly reflected the work that they're putting in, and have made commitments when it comes to things like homes and accommodation, are amongst the reasons for that. Not the only reasons, but they do matter, that people feel valued for the work that they're putting in. So we're turning that around. I have somewhere got the figures. I'm very happy to write to the committee and provide the details of them. But the direction of travel on retention and recruitment is now in the right place.
Thank you. Well, we know that the Defence Select Committee and the Public Accounts Committee have spent some time looking at those issues, so thank you for that.
Yes, and if there's any information that they need that they haven't got, I will obviously provide it.
Now to Bernard Jenkins MP.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. But with the greatest respect about the Defence Investment Plan, the idea that the lack of the plan is not holding anything up is utterly ludicrous. Industry is crying out for certainty that it will bring, and the longer it's delayed, the longer that uncertainty exists. How can you create a 10-year plan without the Treasury making the necessary commitments for the next 10 years for the necessary levels of spending? They won't do that. The Chancellor says it's not on her desk, which means she said no, and she sent it back to the Ministry of Defence. How are you going to resolve this?
Well, it's my job to resolve it. What I want to do is to make sure that the investment we need is going in, and that it's sustained over a 10-year period in accordance with the strategic review. And I want to get that right. What I don't want to do is to set out commitments without being absolutely clear where the money is coming from. Now, of course, we need to take the time to get that right. Of course, it's not easy. There was a lack of investment over many, many years. I think that's palpable, and everybody now accepts that the last government didn't invest anything like enough in our defence, and we're picking that up and turning it around. What I'm not going to do is put a plan that I can't explain exactly how it's going to be funded. We're finalising that. We're nearly there. It's my job to resolve it, and resolve it I will.
Well, you clearly haven't communicated the necessary urgency to the Treasury, who need to come up with the money. And at Cobra this afternoon, you might just ask the question why the Treasury does not seem to realise that we are already at war, and we need to be in a war-fighting mentality to deal with the emergencies that we're facing.
Well, I appreciate that, and that's why it's important that we are clear where the money is coming from. But because of the significant underfundment of the last government, we have to make sure that we get this right. To be perfectly honest, the zero-based review has thrown up all sorts of practices in the MOD which have gone on for years with overcommitment, underfunding, nothing done on time. All of that, I've said, I want the slate white clear. I'm not going on like that anymore. So the plan we're coming up with deals with, yes, the strategic plan, but I'm also clearing up the mess that I've inherited, because we can't go on in the way that when I opened the books and saw the way this has been done for years,
Minister, by all means,
I needed to change it,
Prime
and that's
Minister,
what I'm doing.
By all means, take your party political swipes.
Well,
Here is a paper produced by me and a Labour MP, Derek Twigg, on the Defence Committee, with a foreword by Lord Robertson. We're all agreed that the government is not on a war footing and needs to be very quickly. Why is it not on a war footing now?
Because the strategic review commits us to a war footing, and we now need to put the funding in place in order to get there. I've already announced the increase in defence spending to 2.5%, something that didn't happen under the last government, and where at the election a credible proposition wasn't put forward by your party. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it properly, and I want to be able to explain to Parliament where the money is coming from.
But it sounds as though you are at peace while we are actually at war.
Well, with respect, I'm clearing up the mess that I inherited from the last government. And
I dare say Winston Churchill had a bit of mess to clear up from the previous government. Margaret Thatcher had a bit of mess to clear up from the previous government. But now we are facing an urgency. Why were we so unready to defend Cyprus?
Well, we've got a lot of defensive capability in Cyprus, as you know, including the air capability there. And I've been constantly talking to the Cypriots about this. I was on the phone yet again to the President on Saturday at some great length. His assessment, same as my assessment, is that our two military teams are working as closely as they've ever worked now, and we are absolutely determined to do everything we need to do to defend Cyprus. And that's what I discussed with him at some length, not for the first time in recent weeks, on Saturday morning.
So we couldn't even stop a 150 kilometre per mile an hour drone from getting through to hitting a sovereign base in Cyprus. That means we were unprepared. And the very fact that you immediately wanted to defend a destroyer meant you had failed to anticipate the need to defend Cyprus with a destroyer. But this smacks of a lack of war-fighting mentality that reaches right across the government, which is what we address in this paper about war-fighting readiness, where we are not at. And the Chiefs of Staff are saying, we need to be ready for war. So when are we going to be prepared, and prepared for what?
We are finalising the investment plan. That sits with the Strategic Defence Review.
It smacks of an enormous complacency.
Well, this smacks of the fact that for years there was underinvestment by the last government, and the stripping out and following out of our armed forces.
We've had 18 months
Copyright
to deal
Ben
with that.
Wallace, who was the
I'm
Defence
not
Secretary.
making a party political point.
Well, honestly,
I agree with Ben
14
Wallace.
years of underinvestment,
I agree with
18
Ben
months of
Wallace.
Labour government.
But take drones, for example.
We're picking up the underinvestment of your government.
Last one, Mr.
The whole concept of warfighting has changed in the last 12 months.
I understand that.
I was in Ukraine very recently, and the Ukrainian armed forces are mystified and want to offer help. as they are offering help to the Gulf states, to the NATO frontline states and to NATO JEF about how to prepare for drone warfare.
Yes.
This is being held up by the lack of the defence industrial plan.
No, it's not. I had President Zelensky in last week. I speak to him very, very regularly. He was in last week for some time. I spoke exactly about this to him. I've been to see for myself on a number of occasions in Kyiv their capability. We are putting in backfill to that, working with them on industrial capability to produce drones with them. And I discussed this very issue with him last week. He did not, just for the record, he did not say that anything that they want to do is being held up by anything the UK is doing. On the contrary, he sees us as their foremost ally, and I'm very pleased that we've been able to achieve that, actually on a cross-party basis.
How many defence reviews do you think took place during the Second World War?
Well, I don't know off the top of my head, but I know that
the answer is none. Well, because when you are at war, you get on with it. You don't wait around for a plan.
I think I counted a lot of the words defence and review, in whichever order you want to put them in plan, have been in many documents in my time in Parliament, for sure. Mr Dessy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, I don't want to get into the party political of who hollowed out when and what the previous government did. Given the urgency of the situation, what I'm interested in is what is this government doing in the here and now to produce that defence investment plan. You will recall that during the last meeting of the Liaison Committee, you said that it would be coming very, very soon. It was promised by the autumn of last year. We're now at the end of March. Will this be produced before the PERDA period? And is the defence investment plan on your desk?
Yes, and we are finalising it, but I'm absolutely determined that I will make commitments with appropriate funding that I can be sure is there. I will not make commitments without being clear where the funding is coming from. That is what's gone on for years, and that's why we're in the mess that we're in. I'm not going to repeat it.
So to be clear, it's on your desk, and you are now.
I am bringing together. I am working on finalising it, and
it's a number 10 because we heard from the Treasurer, the Chancellor the other week that it
well, it's obviously cross-departmental.
Yes, but it's gone to you.
I am engaged in the process, actively engaged in the process, and determined that we will get this right.
That's very helpful news. Thank you, Patricia Ferguson.
Prime Minister, we recently had a very good discussion in committee with a number of very innovative SMEs and start-up companies. They expressed to us a frustration about not being able to get onto a list of contractors, a list of tenderers, and wondered how they might do that. Can you reassure them that there is a space for them if they are successful in doing this, and that their new and innovative ideas will be taken seriously?
Yes, let me reassure them, because very many SMEs can and do contribute towards the spending on defence, and it's very important that they do. What we've set up is a special scheme to support them in doing that. That was put in place some months ago, but what we'll do, now you've raised it again, is just refresh that and see make sure they all know about it and can access it, and also whether we can do anything more. But it is really important that we ensure that businesses of all sizes, not just the main defence big businesses, are contributing to what we need to do.
Thank you very much, Ms Ferguson. Bill Esterson, MP.
Thank you very much, Chair. Your cost of living champion, Richard Walker, wrote in the Sunday Times yesterday that there should be a short-term intervention by the government to prevent profiteering in the short term from surging oil and fuel prices. Are you going to follow his advice?
I've just seen him to say we need to discuss those proposals urgently together. But we are looking at measures to deal with profiteering. I've already asked the CMA to look at this. I think we might look at what further teeth we can give the CMA to deal with this. I think there isn't enough regulation in this area. I want to see more on price gouging or profiteering. We absolutely need to bear down on it, and so we're actively considering whether the CMA should have additional powers to deal specifically with that. But at the moment, we're making sure they're focused on anti-profiteering steps that they can take now.
One of the reasons for asking the question, it cost £40 billion to support energy bills in 2022. Preventing excess profiteering might be one way of supporting consumers. And are you considering targeted support this time rather than the universal offer, given just how expensive it was last time?
Well, again, we're looking this afternoon at the approach we might take. I'm acutely aware of how much it cost last time round, and I'm acutely aware of the state of the public finances. But we will look this afternoon at what the appropriate approach is. There are difficulties in that we don't yet know the extent of the challenge we're facing, because we don't know when this conflict is going to come to an end. But we're actively looking at what measures we can put in place.
Yeah, well, that of course is true, but we've got a pretty fair. I mean, you said earlier a couple of times that you don't want to alarm people, but people can see the prices going up now at the pumps. They can see it if they're on heating oil. People want answers now, Prime Minister.
Yeah, we are looking at what support we can put in, and as soon as we're able to answer the question what exactly that looks like, we will make it clear. Obviously, we're looking at, in the first instance, at what happens when the current price cap ends, which is the end of June. I think the one we're equally focused on is the one after that, because the June to September-October period is when only about 7% of only about 77% of energy is used within households. It's after that it gets very heavy. So we're both looking at the end of June, but also looking ahead to the September-October position as well, which is when the energy percentage of energy being used goes up considerably for very obvious reasons.
Yes, thank you. We touched on industry earlier in one of your answers. The Chemicals Industry Association wrote to you on the 3rd of March, and they pointed out that chemical production in the UK is down 40% between 2021 and 2024, and this has a lot to do with the crisis of that time. It's crucial to all sectors of the economy, including to our defence industries. Will you take a look at what the chemicals industry is asking, because at the moment they're not part of some of what the government is proposing to support our heavy industry?
Yes, we're prepared to look across the board, but I don't want to give the impression to the committee that we can simply put in any support to any sector to the extent that every sector will necessarily want. That's why we need to look carefully at what is possible. But we'll obviously look at the chemical sector for the reasons you've set out.
Yes, and turning to energy infrastructure now, you have plans. There's been decisions on nuclear, but if we go back as a lesson, France's response to some of the oil price shocks of the 70s and beyond was to invest in nuclear. At the time, the UK didn't follow that path. We now have Sizewell C, we have the SMR programme. These are big steps forward. Can you commit, but what the industry is asking for is a commitment to a fleet approach to a long-term supply chain of production. Can you make that commitment to give that certainty, given just how important nuclear is going to be?
Yes, I think it's really important, and so let me give that certainty. And that's why we've got the SMR programme, and we've identified a number of places where we will take forward those projects. Up in North Wales, obviously, is one of them. Scotland could well be one of them if the SNP would remove their veto. We could have that in Scotland as well, and would actively consider it. But it is part of the future. The other thing that's very important is that if you look at the Ukraine conflict, you look at the 12-day war, you look at what's happening in Iran now, I am absolutely convinced that we need to go further and faster on renewables. The longer we are on the fossil fuel international market, the more we are susceptible to the changes in energy prices, rapid changes, which we've seen in the last few weeks. The sooner we get onto homegrown renewables where we have control over the price and proper energy security, the better. And that is obviously one of our major missions in government. It's the right thing to do. And recent weeks have shown that rather than slowing down, we should go faster.
Yes, and for consumers to be able to take advantage of it, it's going to be really important. This is what my committee hears again and again and again, that the price of electricity is brought down so people can afford to make that change. At the moment, electricity is more than 4 times the price of gas. It makes it very difficult to make that switch. Will you take the action needed to close that gap between the electricity and gas price?
Yeah, I've been looking at specifically how we can do that for reasons that you will understand. We need to bring the price of electricity down, and we will. And there are a number of possible ways of doing that, but we will do it. The fact that we've got more renewables now than we had at the outbreak of the Ukraine war has helped us a bit in responding in recent weeks, but it shows you the potential if we were able to go further and faster on renewables and actually get control of our own energy prices, because all the time we're on the international market, as soon as there's a conflict, the same thing happens, which is prices go up, we can't control that, and households and businesses are then at the mercy of the markets. We have to get off that system. We have to get to renewables more quickly.
Thank you. And one of the challenges of more use of electricity is the state of the grid, which is another big project on your desk. Is there anything you can tell us about what plans there are? Because that's a very long-term programme to change.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. When I came into politics in 2015, I never thought I'd spend so much of my time talking about the grid. But it is vitally important, again, underinvested for years. We are making real progress now. We've got a new chair of the grid, as you may know, and we're working on the entire infrastructure, but also how you can do localised support and plugging into the grid. It's one of the most important things, but we are working at speed on that, and I'm very happy to write to the committee setting out fuller details of the work that we are doing, but also where we want to take this to.
Thank you. And I think certainly some of the local stuff that's going on has been very helpful to people where that works. There are still some structural issues, but I'll leave that for now and bring in Jamie Stone MP. Mr. Stone.
Yes. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Apropos of what you've just been talking about, Prime Minister, we know that out in the North Sea we have the Rosebank and Jackdaw fields, huge resources of oil and gas. They're massive and they're strategic. They're hugely important to this country. So can I suggest to you, Prime Minister, that we can achieve net zero simultaneously with utilising this strategic asset, particularly in view of the international situation, and particularly in view of what you said, Prime Minister, about being in control of our own energy prices?
Yes. Firstly, you're absolutely right. Oil and gas will be part of the mix for many years to come, and it's really important that we're clear about that and that we support the oil and gas that is already being brought out at huge quantities. We, in November last year, introduced the tiebacks, which is the opportunity to extract further from existing fields or adjacent fields, and we're working at speed on that. In relation to Jackdaw and Rosebank, obviously there's a statutory process around that, which is quasi-judicial, and that is the process that is being operated and has to be operated in a particular way. That's a quasi-judicial decision for the Secretary of State to make, not a government decision to make. But oil and gas will be part of the mix for a long time to come. I would just add to this, though, that that doesn't get us off the international market, unfortunately. The only thing that gets us truly off the international market is renewables. But it's got to be a mix, and we've recognised it's got to be a mix. It is a mix, and it needs to continue to be a mix as we go forward.
But Prime Minister, Rosebank remains an enormous strategic resource. I started my working life in the oil and gas sector. There are thousands of people out there who have made their livelihoods through this. What would be your message to these people? Are we with them?
Yes, absolutely. Firstly, we say thank you to them for the work they have done over decades to supply the energy that we have needed, the work that they will be doing for many years to come to provide the energy that we need. But we do need, alongside that, to make sure that we're doing the work on renewables. I actually think that there's a lot of transferable skills from the oil and gas sector to renewables, and we should make that link.
Okay, and Chair, finally, you've been talking about the nuclear industry.
Yes.
Surely, strategically, a network of small modular reactors all over the UK makes sense, including Scotland. And it seems to me it's an utter nonsense that the Scottish Government can stop this. Can you reassure me that every tool at your disposal, the government's disposal, will be used to make sure this actually happens? Because it'd be so welcomed in places like my colleagues' constituent, my constituent, other parts of Scotland.
Yes, I mean, I completely agree with your analysis. We need SMRs, we need them across the whole of the United Kingdom in a strategic way, and that is what we're putting in place for the other parts of the United Kingdom. It is only the veto of the SNP government that is stopping us going as far as we want in Scotland. I would urge them again to look at this, because it makes complete sense to have an SMR in Scotland. We'd be prepared to look at that straight away if it wasn't for the SNP blocking it. And if I'm urging them on that front, I'd also urge them to take a more open approach to defence projects, because there is a huge amount of defence work, good skilled defence work in Scotland. We want to put more of that into Scotland, but we're being held up by the SNP, who, for ideological reasons, both on SMRs and on defence, are not taking action which is actually in the best interests of working people in Scotland.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Bernard Jenkins MP.
Why doesn't the government do what Professor Dieter Helm recommends, which is to issue North Sea licences for gas production on a conditional basis, on the basis that the gas is brought ashore, maybe against a contract for difference, but a different price than we would buy on the world stage? That's perfectly possible, but the government seems to have an ideological bias against exploiting our own natural gas resources.
Minister.
No, that's not
Well, then
true.
why not get on with it?
No, well,
The decisions have to be made in accordance with the law, and the law sets
It's an
out
emergency
the process.
now. Okay, but Mr Jenkins,
Well,
you
I
asked the question,
appreciate
Mr. Prime
that,
Minister.
but there's a legislative framework in place which has to be complied with, and simply breaking the law without
Oh, it's a
changing
new
it.
law?
Well, you know, we need to operate within the law as it is at the moment and do everything we can to make sure we've got the energy we need.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Liam Byrne MP.
Thanks. I mean, the biggest threat to business right now is actually from spiking gilt prices, driving up interest rates, and they're rising in part due to the expectation of a costly energy subsidy, either to businesses and households. Isn't it now time to actually grasp the nettle and shift the policy costs of transition off electricity bills onto the general taxpayer, so that we end this kind of pressure on bills at the moment, which is frankly crucifying our industry?
Well, firstly, I totally agree that it's inflation we need to keep our eye on, and I'm really pleased that inflation at the spring statement was coming down and predicted to come down further. Obviously, I'm concerned about the impact of recent weeks. As to where exactly the cost is put, whether it's put on bills or on the taxpayer, that's been a lively discussion for some time in politics. Wherever it's put, there's a burden, obviously, in terms of how you raise the money and how it's done.
Is it not now time to actually bring that discussion to a close, take a decision that is actually in the interest of our manufacturers and small businesses? Because small businesses are going to see an increase in their standing charges of 40% kicking in April. You've got Make UK saying that actually we need to bring forward the electricity discount scheme from next year to this year. Industry is crying out now at a time when growth is already under pressure.
Look, I think we need to keep all of this under review and active consideration, and we are. But even if it's shifted to general taxation, it's still, in the end, is taxation on individuals and businesses. So the cost doesn't go away, it just simply gets moved somewhere else. So there's no straightforward cost-free way of doing this. But I certainly agree with you that we should always be looking at whether the balance is in the right place.
Do you think we can bring that decision to a conclusion soon, one way or the other?
Well, we need to. There are pros and cons in either way, as you know, and we keep it under review.
I just want to turn quickly to the economic security that underpins our national security. Right now, do you think that the government is being clear enough with business that needs to invest long term about the kind of sovereign capabilities we need in this country in these new times?
I think we have, but I think we need to do more, because the more sovereign capability we have, the better, so far as I'm concerned. I think in the medium and long term, we have seen more investment coming in the last 18 months than we've seen for some considerable period, particularly with foreign investment into the country. But sovereign capability is really important. I don't think we've done enough of it in the past.
Will you revisit then the decision made by ministers a couple of weeks ago that they won't publish a list of sovereign capabilities, because we're kind of expecting business to be psychic at the moment and guess what it is we're going to build, what it is we're going to buy, and crucially, what we're going to safeguard against investment from China?
Yes, I mean, I'll have a look at what was said just the other week.
We need an industrial policy.
Well, we have an industrial strategy which focuses on 8 sectors.
Just to give you an example of the kind of confusion that bedevils us at the moment, just as recently as last year, we were saying we absolutely needed primary steelmaking capabilities as a sovereign capability. We all came back here on a Saturday to put through the Steel Special Measures Bill. We spent £400 million keeping blast furnaces open. When the steel strategy came out, it said actually there is no long-term guarantee to keep the blast furnaces open. So you can see how industry is actually getting a little bit confused now. And where there is confusion, they're not going to invest in the way that we need to over the medium to long term.
No, I understand that. No, the steel strategy has been broadly welcomed, but it is important that we can produce steel in the way that we need it in this country. And as you know, that was one of the reasons we recalled Parliament on that Saturday just about a year ago now. Not just because of the jobs in Scunthorpe, but of course because of the jobs in Scunthorpe, because of the capability and the capacity as well.
Now, one of the ways that we can actually strengthen the security of our defence industrial base is by joining the European Partnership on Defence Procurement SAFE and actually coordinating our defence policy more generally. You've got a summit coming up with President von der Leyen. Is rejoining SAFE or joining SAFE going to be on the agenda for that? And what's your confidence level in getting it done?
It will certainly be on the agenda. I think what we may see is the next stage of SAFE or the next iteration of SAFE. And I think it was disappointing that we weren't involved at the first stage. I think a number of our partners in Europe think it was disappointing, and we've had quite intensive discussions about how we can improve on that as we go forward, and therefore as we head towards that summit, it will be one of the issues of discussion. It already is one of the issues of discussion in many of the conversations I have with my counterparts in the EU.
And how do we coordinate those discussions with Europe to help safeguard against coercion from China, restrictions on rare earths, for example, and indeed dumping by over-subsidised Chinese firms in a way that is going to destroy, for example, our wind industry and the European wind industry? How do we actually tighten the economic security arrangements with Europe?
It's very important that we do, and we are coordinating, and the discussions with our EU leaders on all those issues are intense, and where we can act together, we should act together because it's in our joint interest to do so, whether that's steel, whether that's critical materials, or other areas where there's a threat both to the EU and to the UK. And the levels of cooperation and discussion in the last 18 months are at a completely different place to anything since the referendum, quite frankly.
Thank you very much. Bill.
Yeah, I mean, just come back to the point about industrial energy costs. Policy costs for industry are up to 60% of the bill, which is significantly higher than it is for consumers. And the point made again by the chemicals sector, and not just by the chemicals sector, is the danger is we reduce our emissions, we decarbonise, not by the transition that you were talking about, but by deindustrialisation and the closure of our industry. Very difficult for our industrial strategy to succeed if we don't have an industry, Prime Minister.
Yes, I agree, and that's why we need to put support in and work with, whether it's the chemical sector or other sectors, to ensure that we retain the capability in this country, and that's what I want to do.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Bernard Jenkins, MP.
On SAFE, why is the Polish President Karol Nawrocki submitting a bill to his parliament to get out of having to take a loan from SAFE on the basis that he has worked out it would cost twice as much to pay back than if they just borrowed that money themselves and spent on their own defence?
I don't know.
So could I suggest you look into that? Because I think gift horses and mouths might be...
Well, I think the Prime Minister's been alerted to that.
No, but just to reassure you and the committee, on SAFE we are having intensive discussions about how we can be involved.
We want to avoid spending money in Europe and we need to spend it on our own farms.
I appreciate that. We will always act.
Which is why you stayed out of the first round.
The reason we stayed out was because of the entry cost. But we need to look at where the benefit is to the United Kingdom. That is the sole prism with which I look at this.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I would say it's getting quite warm in here, so anyone is feel free to take off your jackets, including you, Prime Minister, if you need to. Just to give you a moment there. I think they haven't turned the heating off yet, and the weather's got warm. Chiomwara MP.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Prime Minister, let me start by just emphasising the support that I have found in Newcastle for your continuing in your position of resisting further involvement in the war on Iran. Now, following Liam's points about your economic security priorities, you recently announced significant investment in quantum and AI, now each of which is a huge, diverse sector. So how are you choosing the targeted strategic bets necessary to deliver long-term British competitive advantage and actual meaningful technology sovereignty?
Yes, I mean, both quantum and AI are really important. I think they're going at slightly different paces. AI, we've already started some of the work. We've had an AI action plan in place since January of last year, most of which has been completed, but the AI growth zones are really important to us as well. We've identified AI growth zones, 2 in Wales, 1 in Scotland and various other places where we can go at speed. What we've done with AI is look at where we can have a competitive advantage. We're already one of the top countries in the world. We've got incredible facilities and resource in relation to AI, and we need to make sure that we retain that advantage globally. But AI growth zones are vital to that.
So you're choosing to support AI through the growth zones. In terms of quantum, I think that you've chosen quantum computing to focus on. I'm not clear how you making those choices, but can I ask how the decision to cut nuclear physics research programs fits into that by the UK Research and Innovation Council?
Yes, I mean, the assessment was that it wouldn't cut across what we want to do with either quantum or AI. None of these decisions are easy, but that was the assessment that was taken in relation to that particular decision.
Okay. So the digital battlefield is here in Ukraine and Iran. US company Palantir is at the heart of our digital defence. Are you concerned that we are too reliant on AI, quantum and or drone capabilities provided by foreign private companies who do not share our values or might even be closely allied with our adversaries?
Well, all of these contracts go through a very careful process, but when it comes to things like drones, I do want to increase our domestic capability. The lesson from Ukraine is that drone warfare has changed considerably in 4 short years. I started going to Kyiv at the beginning of the conflict. I've been constantly since then. The rate of development of drones, not the number and the capability, is huge. And I've been very struck in the last 2 visits I've done with the development on drones. We need to be centrally part of that here. Obviously, what we're doing now is co-producing with the Ukrainians, which is what I was discussing with President Zelensky last week. That is to their advantage, but it's also very much to our advantage.
It's good that we're learning from Ukraine with drones, but I mentioned Palantir, and that defence contract was not publicly tendered. Equally, it's at the heart, Palantir is at the heart of the NHS, local government, financial regulation, whilst Amazon Web Services and Microsoft have 70% of UK cloud between them. Now, the US government has significant powers over these companies' supply chains, as well as critically the data that they store, even if they store it here in the UK. So are we not dangerously over-reliant on a small number of US companies for our civil technology infrastructure? And doesn't that undermine UK tech and constrain our policy independence more widely?
I don't think we're over-reliant, but I certainly take up the challenge you put to me that we need to have more domestic capability. I think we've got the ability to do so if we move at pace, and I want us to move at pace because that's obviously a preferred position to be in.
So just how are we making those decisions? And when you say moving at pace, have you got we do have a strategy for identifying sovereign capabilities that's been talked about specifically in technology?
Yes, I mean, on the AI action plan, for example, we've got specific measures on tech more generally. We have obviously reached, at the state visit last year, a really important tech agreement with the US as to how we work together with them, but that involves more UK capability, has record investment coming in from the US to the UK at that state visit, £150 billion.
No, I was very impressed by that, but I'm not sure the further US investment in the UK actually drives UK technology capability. But I just want to come on to that in more with regard to how we support our new technology investment across Europe. So the Munich Technology Security Conference, that you berated our European allies for having 10 types of main battle tanks, while the US only has one. You said it was inefficient. I think you were right. But you didn't call on Europe to all adopt the US Abrams tank, for example. So doesn't the logic of what you said at Munich mean that for AI and for cloud, we should be working with the European Union to develop safe, ethical European capability instead of being so reliant on that less than reliable ally, President Trump of America?
The point I was making in the Munich Security Conference was we have lots of different capability in Europe, lots of different tanks, frigates. It doesn't matter what you pick. The Americans tend to have gone for one product. And I believe that as we increase and step up on security and defence, and of course that does include technology these days, that's part of it, that we should coordinate and collaborate more closely with our European partners on this. So I certainly agree with that. And that's why the deals we're trying to do now are more strategic in that sense than they've been in the past. Same needs to happen in other capabilities. But defence and security is not just, frigates, aircraft, etc., and vessels. It is, of course, energy. It is, of course, technology.
I'm very glad to hear that you're looking more strategically at collaboration with the European Union on technology capability, particularly in AI. Because just finally, Prime Minister, we both campaigned, I remember marching next to you, against Brexit. But I think we also recognise the public anger towards the European Union, in part driven by a sense that we had lost our sovereignty, or part of our sovereignty, to the European Union. Are you concerned the British people will have a similar reaction to the loss of sovereignty to US tech giants?
Well, I don't want to reopen old wounds.
No, I don't want you to. But it's,
the Brexit vote, we all voted. And I respect the vote that we, the outcome of the vote. But I don't accept that it means we have to operate in the way we did under the last government, which is not to have a particularly good deal with the EU, not to coordinate when it's in our interest to do so. And that's why we reset the relationship at the UK-EU summit last year, and we've got another summit coming up this year. I think in relation to the US, when it comes to defence and security, obviously we've had a decades-long relationship with the US when it comes to defence and security and intelligence. That is hugely important for our country and shouldn't be underestimated. And I still firmly believe that we can have that relationship with the US and a stronger relationship with the EU, and that the constant demands on me to choose one or the other are wrong when it comes to defence, security and intelligence. It is having both relationships that's kept us safe for 80 plus years, and we hold that very closely and very dear.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. It's unfortunate but inevitable that big international crises like that in Iran sometimes knock other existing crises off the front pages. So we do want to spend a moment talking about some of the other issues around the world. And I'm going to ask Debbie Abrahams, MP, to lead off.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Prime Minister.
Good afternoon.
The Attorney General has said the UK wants to play its role in ensuring compliance with international law and the rules-based system. I believe he's going to be making another speech on this this afternoon. But on this, we know, for example, from UN human rights experts, there has been a condemnation of the unprovoked military attack on Iran by the US and Israel, saying it violates Article 2 of the UN Charter, notwithstanding that we know that Iran is a corrupt and oppressive regime. So I wonder if you could expand on the response you gave to Liam Byrne earlier about what you are doing specifically with international allies to resolve and de-escalate this crisis. And if you could give us a particular nuance on the leadership that you're showing in this. We know you have a significant leadership around Ukraine, and it'd be really useful for us to understand your leadership in this as well.
Yeah, well, thank you. Just on Iran, the principles I've applied throughout is that for any UK action, there must be a lawful basis and a viable and thought-through plan. That is why we didn't join the original offensive strikes. It is why we did take defensive action, collective self-defensive action, on our own behalf when it came to the work that we're doing with our allies in the region, taking missiles out that are coming from Iran. It's also why we allowed our bases to be used for the purposes of collective self-defence. But that's an important divide. So collective self-defence, yes, and we've taken appropriate action, but this is not our war, and we are not getting dragged into this war. So that's the divide that I've kept very firmly in place. On Ukraine, obviously, there's been a cross-party consensus on supporting Ukraine for, sadly, 4+ years now. And we've been very clear throughout. The aggressor is Russia. This Ukraine conflict could end tomorrow if the aggressor stopped the aggression. We mustn't lose sight of that. Obviously, different considerations. There we've pulled together the coalition of the willing under the leadership of myself and President Macron, with Chancellor Merz now playing an increasingly important part. And that is a coalition of countries that are committed to providing security guarantees in the event of a ceasefire in Ukraine. So that's the sort of principled approach that I've taken to the Iran conflict and to the Ukrainian conflict.
So you don't see parallels in terms of how the potential to de-escalate the current conflict could be?
In the current conflict, we are working with others on how we de-escalate. There are a number of aspects to that. Specifically on the Straits of Hormuz, we managed to get a statement out, which we did a lot of work because the UK leading on last Thursday, of the so-called E4 countries, plus at the time Japan, Canada, Australia. Other countries have now joined that, so that's it's becoming a bigger group of countries that are committed to working on de-escalation as far as the Straits are concerned, which is hugely important for our economy. More generally, we do need to de-escalate, and that's why I welcome the development on talks and indicate that we were aware that that was happening, and we are working with others to see how we can develop that to a point of de-escalation. It's very important that we get to that.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Abrahams.
So the Attorney General has also said about, in terms of the N, that it is a beacon of hope in terms of maintaining our rules-based system. But for millions of Palestinians, UNRWA is their beacon of hope, helping to keep them alive. The outgoing UNRWA Commissioner General said at the weekend, it's incomprehensible that a UN entity has been allowed to be crushed as UNRWA has, in violation of international law, with total impunity, and with staff and Palestinian communities paying an unacceptable price. So again, what is the UK doing with like-minded allies to ensure that international law is being upheld, and that UNRWA and the other 37 INGOs can continue to provide humanitarian aid to Palestinians?
I think the UN is really important, as I think the rules-based system is really important. And when we call out Russia as the aggressor in Ukraine, we are doing so on the basis of the Charter. That is part of the rules-based system. So anybody who says Russia is the aggressor is necessarily reinforcing the rules-based system as set out in the Charter. I think it's important the UK does continue to play a leading role in this, in answer to your question about what we can do. I do think I was pleased with the ceasefire in Gaza, although it hasn't led to the cessation of all hostilities, and certainly the West Bank is a cause for concern. But the UN aid needs to get in greater volume, with greater urgency, and the UN needs to be involved in that, and that's the case that we continue to make, and it's a really important part of what we need to do to ensure that that ceasefire holds.
So the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion in July 2024 ruled that Israel's continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territories is unlawful and must end, including the cessation of all new settlements. Last month, the French joined 9 other European states, as well as many Arab nations, to condemn the sweeping extensions to unlawful Israeli settlements over the West Bank. This is imminent. Prime Minister. Yeah. We know that as much as we recognise Palestinian last September, the viability of a Palestinian state is seriously jeopardised by this unlawful action that currently we have failed to do anything about. This is followed by the German Chancellor, who last week mentioned that he called the disastrous E1 settlement an annexation move, and that Europe must unite to tell Israel to stop. Now, I appreciate we've also said these are unlawful settlements, but will you work with the French, German and others on tangible action, including issuing a joint statement that any potential bidder of E1 tenders will put their business interests at risk in the UK and other countries opposed to these unlawful actions?
Prime Minister.
Yeah, let me just unpack and deal with those points. Firstly, the recognition decision last year was really important, and you will know that the timing and the coordinating that with others was really important in my view. I've always believed that working with other countries at the same time helps and can help create the conditions for what then followed, which was the ceasefire. I'm not saying it was the sole cause, but it certainly helped create the conditions in relation to the reaction of others. On the occupation, look, it is unlawful. That's been the long-standing policy position of the government, and we are always working with others on this and related issues.
Prime Minister, I appreciate exactly what you're saying, but there are... In December, we had the deregistration of 37 international humanitarian organisations against international law. We had the announcement on the 31st of December of the expansion of the E1 settlements development, jeopardising the two-state solution. And as yet, we haven't done anything about it. The Board of Peace has morphed from what the UN Security Council agreed to.
Minister.
Well, look, I mean, I say again, the occupation is unlawful, and any expansion of it necessarily so, and that's been the consistent position of the government. And I can
I press you on what we will do? Will we issue a statement?
We are working with others, and I'll very happily send you further details of what we're doing so you can see the full extent.
Thank you. Sarah Champion, MP.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, if I could just build on Debbie's point. I've been really shocked at the rapid rate of expansions of the illegal settlements. And so I'm really grateful for the sanctions that this government has put on the worst offenders. I've become very interested in procurement and supply chain transparency, as it seems a very elegant way to deal with some problems. So is there any opportunity for you to look at the legislation around goods that are coming out of the illegal settlements and labelling them as such in the UK, so that consumers can actually make an informed choice and we can basically reward good behaviour?
Yeah, look, I think it is important that we obviously say what our position in principle is and then take appropriate action. And we're always looking at what action is appropriate, and I'm very happy to write to you to set out what we have done and what may be possible as we go forward.
Thank you.
Oh,
is it over to me? Okay. Again, I'm really pleased and proud that you've made tackling violence against women and girls a priority in the UK. Is it also your intention to have it as a priority internationally?
Yes, I think it's really important that we do. And obviously we've had to take difficult decisions in relation to overseas development aid, but within that we've had to be really clear what our priorities are. And obviously here in the UK, halving violence against women and girls is one of our missions, and it's a really important one politically and to me personally. That also has to be a priority when it comes to what we're doing internationally, and of course there's always a correlation between the two in any event.
Are you able to do anything to push back against the, well, if I call it, the challenge of anti-gender movement, the backsliding on both women and girls' rights, but also LGBT rights. I'm thinking anti-abortion, anti-maternal health. Is there anything that you're able to do on the international stage around that?
I think it's important that we stand up for our principles, and on violence against women and girls, I think it's hugely important that we continue. I mean, we're a long way internationally and domestically from where we need to be, and we need to bear down on it all of the time. I'm still shocked by the statistics in this country, the sheer number of women that are killed by a partner or ex-partner, a figure that hasn't changed for many, many years. The shocking number of women and girls who don't feel they've got the confidence to come forward to report what's happened to them, or confidence in the ability of our criminal justice system as it is to give them the justice they need, and also internationally what we need to do with other partners.
I'm thinking, for example, the US has basically put a gagging clause on any agency, indeed state agencies as well as charities that are working with sexual and reproductive health rights. So it's sort of challenging that when you're at the table with those people.
We will always stand up for our principles.
Thank you. Projects in Sudan, Somalia and Tunisia were previously described by FCDO as essential to counter the rise of violence and extremism are now being cut. The Integrated Security Fund is a cross-government pot of money, and it's tackling threats to national security is its priority. That's been cut by 43%. And part of that is closing the standalone gender and national security portfolio. So I wonder, you say that you were cutting aid and the money was going to support defence, but I wonder now if you reflect on that and actually realise that foreign aid was part of our defence.
Well, as I said at the time, no Labour government wants to cut overseas development aid, but we had to answer the question, how will we pay for the increase in defence spending to 2.7%?
I view foreign aid as our sort of early
I do absolutely understand that and respect that. I think it has forced us in a way to look again at how we work on the question of overseas development. And I think there is a shift. I think that with other countries, they want to see the relationship change from donor to investor. There's lots of reasonably good models. I think we need to go further and faster on those and work them up at pace. But I do think that in addition to saying we want to get more spend on overseas development when we can, we should
priority to get back to more spend.
Yes, when resources permit. But I don't want to waste the years or however long in between, because I do think that we can get donations and investment in a different way. I think that model is beginning to work. You saw examples that at COP, for example, some of the work that Prince William is doing is championing that way of getting investment in, and that then can come alongside any increase in overseas development aid if and when we can afford it.
Beautifully into my last question. You'll have heard today the warning from the UN that basically there's now more CO2 in the air than in the last 2 million years. And we see in our oceans and on land the consequence of that. So your government's cutting $6 billion from the International Climate Finance Fund. Will you reconsider that?
Well, we are committed to what we need to do on climate finance. We've had to look at what we can spend on overseas development aid, but it doesn't lessen the commitment on this, and that's amongst the reasons I went to COP to show our commitment on this and to work with others. And at COP we were looking, and we are looking actively at other funding mechanisms than simply putting in public money, as it were, in the way that's been done up until now. And I do genuinely believe there's good progress there, and there's potential for even more progress if we keep working in that way.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Ms Champion. Andy Slaughter MP.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Can I just mop up one or two of these international law points? We've seen very little published by the government on the legal basis for the current conflict in the Middle East, less than has happened with less serious and less complex crises previously. And given the number of countries involved, the different positions they're taking, the constant 180-degree changes of view by the US president that can go from where it's about to finish one day to it's about to intensify the next, or to it's already finished. Can we not have, not obviously a government legal opinion published, but have what we've had in previous conflicts, a summary of what the government's position is on these very complex issues?
Yes, well, I mean, we have published a summary of the legal basis for the use of our bases by the US, collective self-defense. As far as I know, nobody has challenged that legal basis. Nobody is saying the analysis is wrong. And I think I'm right in saying, but I'll be correct if I'm not, that the summary mirrors very much what the previous government did when they were taking action, because I looked again at the way in which they summarised their position before agreeing the way in which we would summarise the position in relation to these acts.
That was one very short statement on the 1st of March and a clarification on the 20th of March in relation to the Straits of Hormuz. There are 10 to a dozen countries that have been subject to hostilities from Iran. There is Israeli action in Lebanon and West Bank, all going on around the main conflict there. Surely the government is able to say what its view is in relation to the international law aspects of those conflicts.
Well, there's two different things. The first is publishing the legal basis of the actions that we take. That is important. That's why we've done the summary. The government hasn't in the past, and for good reason, tended to do legal summaries of the actions of other governments. So what we've done is continue to make sure that where we propose to take action, we've set out why we're doing it and what the lawful basis for that is. The basis for the decision in relation to the Straits of Hormuz was the same legal basis as the decision taken earlier, which was the collective self-defence of our allies and, of course, of our own interests and our own people.
Well, the UK has been very clear over the years, ever since UN Security Resolution 242, which is nearly 60 years ago now, that we, on the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by war, we were clear on that in regard to Ukraine. We now have that happening in Palestine, in Syria, in Lebanon as well. What is the government doing to uphold those principles in relation to the Middle East?
Well, the lawfulness underpins all of the principles and policy decisions that we take, and it's important that that continues to be the case. It's important that we champion the UN and the rules-based system. It is hugely to the advantage of the United Kingdom.
But there always seems to be, in relation to Middle East conflicts, a difference between the basic principle, what the Attorney General is talking about tonight on the rules-based order, and the practicality of that. So, for example, in relation to the West Bank, your Middle East Minister said on the 3rd of March, we will consider concrete steps in accordance with international law to counter the expansion of illegal settlements. But we never seem to hear what that concrete action is going to be. There'll be statements or condemnations, but nothing going beyond that.
There has been action going beyond that, but I'm very happy to update you or the committee, whichever is appropriate, on what further measures have been taken or might be taken.
My colleague spoke today. I don't think you fully answered in relation to E1. That's the crucial issue on settlements at the moment. And equally, which we always bring up at these sessions, but no apology for that, the ICJ opinion. If the government isn't going to respond to that after almost 2 years, could just put us out of our misery and say that?
Well, look, it is under consideration, and that remains the position.
Okay, Mr. Slaughter.
I think the last question is, given there are many violations of international law taking place around the world, and that is undermining the rules-based international order, do you agree that the UK should not be a safe haven for those who have committed international crimes? And I'm assuming your answer to that is going to be yes. So
yes.
It'll be strange if it was no. But in that respect, do you believe that domestic authorities should exercise universal jurisdiction over genocide, crime against humanity and war crime?
Well, the rules of universal jurisdiction are pretty complicated and apply to different crimes in different ways, and to some crimes not at all. but where there is universal jurisdiction and where we have obligations under a treaty, that does translate into the actions of our domestic authorities, and the International Criminal Court is an example of that, not the only example, but is an example of that, where there's a number of steps that are taken because we're a signatory to the treaty.
Okay, well, I'll finish on this, but I think there's a common theme here. It's that we're very good on the principles, but not so good on the practice. And a good example of that would be recognising the state of Palestine, which I think most people will support. But what's the practicality of that? Where's the coalition of the willing around Palestine's success as a state?
Firstly, it was really important that we acted in the way we did and did it in coordination with other countries, and that took quite a lot of work. But it was the right thing to do. I've always felt that where we can act collectively is better than acting individually. In terms of the follow-through, let me be really clear. I think obviously the ceasefire in Gaza is hugely welcomed, but we have to press on to the next stage. And that does involve building on the question of recognition and having in place a process and agreed steps for getting there. That is something we're actively engaged in with other countries. Vital, I think, to any enduring cessation of hostilities and peace in the region, because I fundamentally believe we won't get to peace in the region on a sustained basis without it.
The situation has never been worse in the West Bank. Some would say that's a reaction to what we've
I'm worried about the West Bank. I think that not enough attention is paid to what's going on in the West Bank. I'm pleased you brought it up.
Your Middle East Minister is right. There will be some concrete action taken.
Well, I will set out what we're considering.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Byrne.
One thing we could do now is introduce a really hard ban on goods from illegal settlements. But at the moment, ministers seem to be supplying my committee with letters without some real concrete action. Is that something you can look at again?
Well, we keep it under review, and I'm tempted to say I'll write to you without comfort. Since you've got so many letters, I'll find a different way of communicating it to you.
I think if the departments could respond to letters from select committees with a proper detail, that would be a good start.
Well,
save you
I've got a cabinet meeting tomorrow, so I will put that on the list of things to do at the beginning.
And I just wanted to pick up on a point in response to Mr. Slaughter. You were talking about the legal basis for action in Iran, and you were very clear in the original position. On Friday, though, you gave permission for the US to use the UK bases to target Iranian forces that are, in effect, keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed. Can you just be clear which states under international law are being defended through that action? Is it as clear a legal position as you were outlining?
Well, it's predominantly our allies in the region, and the legal basis is the same.
Which particular states?
Well,
name some.
All of those in the region that we are not just allowing US bases to be used to defend, of our bases to be used, but also we've got our own capability and assets in the sky there. But the legal, I mean, if you step back from this, we had already said, for the purposes of the defence, collective self-defence of our allies, and in fact our people who are in the region, we will allow...
I think we're very clear about that original position.
Just to explain the legal bit, we will allow the US to strike Iran's capability to send missiles essentially to land, to infrastructure, hotels, bases. What Friday did was to extend that to vessels in the region, and because the illogicality of strikes that hit hotels and then you've got vessels in the water nearby that needed to be protected under the same legal framework, exactly the same legal framework. So actually that was an extension of the original decision as the targets of Iran have changed. So the set of targets that we've authorised the basis to be used for has changed accordingly, but the legal basis is precisely the same as the original legal basis, and the logic actually is precisely the same as well.
Okay, thank you. Bernard Jenkins.
Just returning very briefly I very much welcome your commitment to sovereign UK industrial capability, particularly in defence. But when it comes to UK participation in defence programmes in the EU under SAFE, what assurances can you give that we will retain all our intellectual property and nobody will be required to hand over the IP to the EU?
Well, that's a very important consideration, and we will only do this on the basis it's in our best interests to do so with whatever guardrails or safeguards need to be in place. Being in the system doesn't mean you're sort of obliged to actually have any particular contracts, but it means you have the ability to do so. We will engage each of them according to what's in our interests.
Thank you. Florence Eshalomi.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Obviously, we've spoken a lot about the international context, and there's another area in terms of foreign international interference in UK politics, a real big threat to democracy. Government announced the Rycroft review in December. Like the Strategic Defence Review, we don't have a date for when that review will conclude. Will you and the government be accepting the recommendations around looking really seriously at banning cryptocurrencies? Because you have an element where it's really hard to trace the source of that funding, and it's many bad faith actors interfering with UK politics. Is that a recommendation that government will be accepting once we finally
well, the Rycroft review is near conclusion, and therefore we'll be able to share that in due course, but it's near conclusion. It's at the tail end of the process.
No date on that then, Prime Minister?
And we will obviously set out what our response is to any recommendations in the review when we put the review into the public domain.
No date on the conclusion?
No, other than to say it's well advanced now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Eshalomi. Prime Minister, last summer the Strategic Defence Review recommended that you personally lead a national conversation on defence and security. When will you begin that conversation, or do you consider that you've started that?
I think we've started on that. There have been a number of elements to it, and it is a discussion that we need to have, because as we spend more on defence and security, the country needs to come with us on that journey. Businesses, small businesses, etc., need to be part of the story, and so I consider it started, but I'm urged quite rightly by others to take it to another level, and I do think we're going to have to do that.
Do you think that the public understand the real trade-offs that will have to be made if there's more investment in defence? And Ms Champion highlighted just some of those just in the international sphere, let alone domestically.
I think that's the point of having the conversation, because in the abstract, when you say to people, should we spend more on defence, the answer tends to be yes. When you then say, does that mean we should spend less on something else, it becomes a more nuanced answer. That's not just the public. I find that in Parliament as well, quite frequently as well.
We're all here to argue for our areas.
It's a conversation that needs to be had with the country, but it's a conversation that needs to start and be had here as well. In all seriousness, I mean, there are difficult challenges ahead, but certainly as we take these decisions, there needs to be a proper conversation about it.
And I don't doubt your sincerity in wanting to have a conversation, but can you give us some precise examples of what that's actually going to mean? What's it mean to constituents in Hackney South and Shoreditch, in Slough, Vauxhall?
Already, I think in constituencies where there are SMEs, and there are very many constituencies, those conversations going on. One of the things I think we did before the summer break, but I'll absolutely double check this, is I asked for all of the businesses that could benefit from our increased defence spend or from the trade deals we've done to be identified in each constituency, so those conversations could go on. And I urged all MPs to spend some of their Friday talking to businesses in their communities about the advantages that were there for them. And I know that some of them have begun those conversations, but I will find the appropriate. The details were published some time ago.
And with defence industries, they'll be keen to have the conversation, but the general public may be harder to reach. How are you planning to
No, they will be harder to reach, but given the sheer number of SMEs that could take advantage, there's quite a lot of public in each constituency that are covered by people who work there, their family, their community, would be quite extensive, and it's a good place to start.
We've obviously talked quite a lot about the international issues. Yesterday you had a call with President Trump. Today you've got a COBRA meeting about the domestic matters. As the world faces these challenges, and as you're dealing with President Trump, who does make some quite rude comments about the UK one day, and sometimes is supportive of the UK. You're dealing, seems like, different presidents on different days of the week. Have you got a message for the public about how you are personally facing these challenges and how the country needs to face the challenges of the world order and the challenge to the world order?
Yes, I'm utterly focused on what's in the best interests of our country, and I'm unapologetic about that. And notwithstanding the pressure that comes from elsewhere, I will remain laser focused on what is in the British national interest. And a lot of what is said or done is undoubtedly said and done to put pressure on me. I have no doubt about that. I understand exactly what is going on, but I'm not going to be wavering on this. I'm the British Prime Minister, and my job is to be absolutely focused on what's in the British national interest. That has served me well in recent weeks, and that is the principle that I'll continue to adhere to as we go forward, taking difficult decisions, notwithstanding the pressure that comes from me from a number of different places.
Finally, you've got the COBRA meeting, which you're talking about economic issues. Will you be discussing business support, some of which came up with various questions, Mr. Eston in particular?
Yes, we will.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we'll be looking at a range of possible ways forward.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Prime Minister. Order.